At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Elijah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm really excited. It's interesting as I've interviewed a number of different people, I find it's fascinating that each individual has a slightly different approach to certain topics, which is going to be an interesting topic today. What I'd love for you to do is share with the audience, how did you get to this point in your life? What is your story? What is that background that brought you to where you are now and what you're doing for people?
Well, first we'd have to identify what point in the story I'm at. So that's an interesting thought. I'm still here, turning 61 in December. Um, I assume you're just talking about one's personal development and what they've done with their life. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what brought you to that point?
Well, I would just say that I don't know if I'm unusual, but I mean, when I talk to other people, maybe sounds unusual, but really from the moment I got to this place, I was always sort of thinking about why I was here and what my purpose was. I even remember some of my first thoughts when I was 3 years old, just being like, what am I doing here? So, when, music was sort of my first gateway to inspiration and a sense of connection to the universe. And I still play music all the time, but I was in the music business in my 20s. And I tell this story actually in my recent book. I was playing in this piano bar. I had piano teachers who used to hit my hands with a ruler. And
Oh, wow.
so a little bit of trauma there, like want to express, but got in trouble, didn't practice, of course. But when I became a musician, I had this kind of this terror when I was in front of people. I would close up, my hands would get cold. There was this massage place next door to where I was playing in this piano bar, and I made friends with the woman, and then she was moving to California. I lived in Canada at the time. And she said, look, put stuff in storage. I'll give you a massage. And I thought, broke musician, sure. She said, well, why don't you try this breathwork thing that my husband does? And I said, it sounds like work, but okay. And that one experience, I was in my mid 20s. It, I mean, I can't, even to this day, I kind of can't believe like that changed the trajectory of my life, because I've been doing breath work for 35 years, and they moved to San Francisco, and I came out for a training. I sort of fell in love with the Bay Area, and then I moved out here, and my life of helping people with their path, releasing trauma. Well, the thing about the hands was that when I did the breath work, I had the most craziest intense pain in my hands. But after that day, my creativity opened up and I was feeling much freer. So it was sort of a sign to me. And I think I've had this sort of dual path between, which most people who help others do, like between my work on myself, to try to make my own life better, and helping people. But I've probably done breath work with 20,000 people. I've given more than 15,000 private sessions of just sometimes breath work talking. I've traveled traveled the North America pretty much nonstop till the pandemic, leading workshops and trainings and stuff. So um, yeah, that's it. I'll maybe mention one other thing, which is that in 1999, I met this man named George Shu, Chinese man in San Francisco, who I started to learn internal martial arts from. And I went to him for good 15 years, and then he took a group of people over to China and had some of the last great living masters of Tai Chi and other these forms. And I fell in love with China and I started going there. I went there 21 times, studied
Wow.
Mandarin, uh, and really penetrated that world and that subject. So my work kind of has two parts. One is trauma release, breath work, connecting to who you are, and then using movement, which is really from all this internal martial arts is from Taoism, and using that to help retrain habit patterns in the body mind to so people can fulfill their life purpose.
Wow. I certainly have heard a lot about breath work, and I assume that there's some meditation in that. But the body movement, that's fascinating to me also. And I've not heard much about that. So hopefully we can spend a little bit of time
Sure.
talking about that. So let's talk about the breath work. There's so many people that talk about breath work, and particularly in
Yeah.
meditation, and you have different types. What is it about the breath work that you promote, and why is it different than others that people talk about in a
Yeah.
meditative state?
That's a good question. Let's just define a couple things, like what is breath work,
Yes.
and all, and also what is meditation, because people think of that in different ways. But breath work, it's kind of generic, breath and work. But if you think about it, all of your internal organs, you're an animal. They're unconscious. You can't make your liver do something. Where the animal in us will just live no matter what. Your organs just operate by themselves. But the lungs have this unique capability of being able to be operated manually or automatic. Um, the choice to breathe is really what breath work is. It's conscious breathing. So if you think about breathing through the nose or breathing through the mouth, the left side, the right side, holding the breath, that's almost every breath work technique that exists. And in some ways, breath work is probably older than meditation, is probably the oldest practice on the planet. And I think its power is that if breath is life, because you can't live without it, then what you're trying to access inside of oxygen isn't God, but you can't live without oxygen. But inside oxygen is the life force energy, what they call chi or prana. And you're trying to extract the power of the universe that gives you life through a conscious breathing. And the metaphor to me is that you can be an animal and unconscious and just live your life and not think about it, and you'll still be alive. Just go to your job and do your thing or whatever. But you have a podcast because people think about choosing a better life. So when you choose to breathe, it's like you're choosing to be more conscious, you're choosing to be more aware, and that in breath takes you on a journey back into your inner world, into your unconscious. So every breathwork technique has its different values. And the one that I do, effigy, EFFIJI, comes from a style or a family of mouth breathing practices that go back 5,000 years. And it's basically consciously hyperventilating. And I could
Okay.
demonstrate if you want. I'd have
Absolutely.
to.
And for those that are listening with the
Yeah,
audio, they'll hear you. For those that are
yeah.
watching the video, they'll see you.
Yeah, and we just only 2 months ago, I put up a video, a 3-minute video that people can do with me, guided of the practice. It's a very powerful, potentially dangerous practice if unguided, because we do it for an hour. So I've been reticent to, there's reasons that it is 1 hour, but this 3-minute practice, anybody can do it. It's on my website. So I'm just going to turn on my original sound or you won't hear me breathing. But if you hear an echo, you may want to mute yourself.
Okay, go
So it
ahead.
goes like this. You're breathing in the center of the chest, mouth open, about 2 fingers wide, and all focused on the inhale. So inhale, mouth, and like this. And we breathe like that for 1 hour without stopping.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't
So,
even imagine what that does to you.
well, the first few minutes are, it's a lot of sensation, and you're laying on your back, so it's safe that way, if you get dizzy or whatever. But you basically enter an altered state, and all the material of your life that's been unresolved, which is basically what trauma is, it starts to, the journey in that in breath starts to like take you toward that place, and you start to release energy, and it's very powerful. I'll add one last thing, just meditation. If you think of meditation, vipassana as watching the breath, like, so, if you watch your breath, you don't identify with the mind going off or whatever.
Right.
In that way, this is similar to a meditation practice, because a lot of stuff comes up when you're breathing, and the idea is just keep breathing. And a lot of people who've done meditation, well, I had one student, a young man, who said this was meditation on steroids, because if you just sit and watch your breath, you're doing nothing, and it's not active. But when you breathe like that, so much flashes comes up when you're breathing. It's physical, mental, emotional, it's everything.
And it
So
just naturally happens.
yeah, and I think that's the democracy of it. It's what I love about the practice and why it's stuck with me so long. You don't have to be intelligent or spiritual or developed or even healthy or young. If you just breathe, within 2 minutes, people do my 3 minute thing on the site. You'll get the beginnings of the practice. You'll feel both the exhilaration and the resistance, because I said an hour, and for 35 years, I look at people's faces like yours, like, an hour. How the hell am I going to do that for an hour? But believe it or not, you can, and it takes you on quite a journey. You
Well,
know,
and so as you say, and I think this is important for the audience to hear and understand, this is not something they do on their own for an hour because it could be potentially dangerous. Is that kind of what you're saying?
um, yeah, yes, I am saying that. I'll say two things. This is conscious hyperventilation, and I have doctors in my family. My mom was a pharmacist. I had a center in San Francisco next to the hospitals, and doctors would always talk to me about the negatives of hyperventilation. When somebody starts to hyperventilate, it's an involuntary unconscious response
Yes.
to memory, like a trauma that's coming up, and you start to do this thing. But this is a conscious choice, so it's very different. And the purpose of the facilitator, which is one thing that sets us apart from some of the other famous techniques for breath work, is that the role of the facilitator is so important to give you safe passage, because you're in an altered state and it's a lot of memory. And sometimes people get things come up and they don't know that it's not real, that it's just memory. So the facilitator's role is to make sure that you're safe and that you release it, so that you feel exhilarated, so that you're not carrying around sort of your energy stuck. So yes, the facilitator is important,
So is it kind
and
of,
so is the waiver.
you have, yeah, I'll bet. You have a guided meditation. So are you talking during that process, or are you there observing, and then when you see things start to come up, then having some type of conversation with your client?
It's completely, I'm only speaking for myself because I've trained lots of facilitators. Everybody has their unique gift. If somebody is a body worker, they may have a real ability with touch during it. So, but for me, there's no rules. I'm trying to be available to help that person. And there's everything that I see is a guess in a way, because it's all happening in their inner life. But I mean, of course, if somebody's crying, or when I first breathed the first time, my hands were all curled up in a ball, like, but you wouldn't have known that I had piano teachers who hit my hands. So sometimes I'm talking or touch, but at its best, what's empowering about the practice is the breath. You do the work. So the breath brings up what's there and you release it. So you feel the empowerment of having taken yourself into the transformation. And this way, it's very different than things like plant medicine, which a lot of people in the US, and people talk about but that's something you take externally that takes you on a journey. This is you doing the work. So at my best, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to hold space. But that almost never happens. Even just to tell someone you're doing great is helpful. Just to know that there's somebody objectively holding the space. So, and also, probably most importantly, my thing, I play music. Everybody plays music during the breath, and there are 6 stages of effigy breath work as I see it, and I have music for each stage, and I've composed all the music. If you go on the streaming services, I have 25 1 hour volumes of music going back about 15 years. So I've created a whole genre of music that its purpose is not for you to almost notice it, but it to help the process along and evoke, uh, kind of resonate with the stages of it. So the music's one of the ways that I use to guide. Yeah.
Well, and I listened to some of it, and I found it fascinating because initially I was anticipating. I went to your website, so I was looking at all of that
Yeah.
stuff,
Thank you.
and
Appreciate it.
and as I started to listen, my first anticipation, because I try to meditate every day. I don't always get that in, but
Yeah.
usually every day I'm doing a walking meditation, and I listen
Yeah.
to music. Or I listen to meditative type of things. A lot of times
Yeah.
it's just the monks chanting or whatever.
Yeah.
Your music is entirely different from that, and I found that
Thank you.
fascinating. I found it
Yeah.
fascinating. So that's there just to help them along with the breath work, and it's not necessarily solfeggio frequencies or chanting or
Right.
anything else. And I want the audience to understand that it's an entirely
Yeah.
different approach.
It's thank you. And thank you for like just checking it out because I do lots of podcasts and not everybody has any. I mean, I think our subject interest is probably similar. So it's not new age music, it's not meditation music, it's not specifically like spiritual music like chanting, although I studied Indian classical music, raga, for many years with the a very famous jazz musician, Terry Riley. And so sometimes Indian music gets into what I'm doing, but I was also a rock musician in the 6 stages. Some of it is super rhythmic, some of it's very more emotional, dramatic, so has a more of a filmy quality. Some of it is just like a rising up kind of uh, bringing, helping people to go to that level. Like when people don't remember the music, I know I succeeded because it's supposed to draw you into yourself. I Before I started creating my own music, 2012, like the things I would use, one example would be Philip Glass. Like Philip Glass, I saw a documentary on him, and well, Terry Riley invented minimalist classical music or pattern music that Philip Glass came out of. And Philip Glass music is like very repetitive, but he calls it like mining an underground stream. And to me, life is like that. It's like very, very small changes. And so I would use his music because it almost like sucks you under. And you're not really noticing it, but you're kind of moving with it. And so a lot of my music, like you don't hear like in a film score, like a big crash, and here's the drama. It's not narrating, it's trying to get you to be inside of the river you're in, wherever you're in with that. So sometimes I'm matching the music, and that's what all that stuff I have is for. And some of it's exalting and celebratory, it's different stages of the practice.
Well, let's talk about your latest book, The Trauma Code.
Hmm,
Okay,
I
and
have it right here.
as you get into that, what is the main point of the book, and what are you trying
Yeah,
to accomplish for people that are reading it? What is the outcome that you seek for them?
yeah. Well, over the years of working with people, what I noticed is that the place that people are suffering is so close to their superpowers, their greatest gifts. And I say that you're born with a unique in original configuration, like an acorn that wants to become an oak tree. And when you have trauma, which are just the unresolved events of the past, big or small, by the way, like it doesn't have to be like abuse or something, your energy gets stuck and the trajectory of your life changes and it's harder to fulfill that. So there's the adverse effects of trauma. But the value of trauma, I see it as compost in the garden, not garbage, meaning that if you can unlock the energy, it has something to do with the fulfillment of this life purpose, of this acorn becoming an oak tree. So what I call the trauma code, which is the name of the book, is that you're trying to swipe your phone to unlock it. Like you have to get the value, the lesson of trauma in order to fulfill your life purpose. So trauma has a value. And I can see that this configuration most definitely inside the breath work. And my main message in the book is twofold. There's certain specific effects of trauma, and they are false interpretation of reality through the lens of trauma. You see things incorrectly. And the other is you're adverse to feeling. You're adverse to just feeling emotion. But the other main message is that trauma isn't just garbage to be gotten rid of. It has something to do with why you're here. And when you can unlock the energy of trauma instead of living in the adverse effects of it, it becomes part of the fulfillment of your life purpose.
Okay, I want to get into this a little bit more because I find this fascinating. So, and as you define trauma, you're not talking necessarily about the heavy trauma that we hear about a lot. Physical,
Yeah.
emotional, all of that. But as you said, so often as a child, uh, for instance, I'm growing up and my dad makes a comment and he's trying to help me, but my perception is that he's criticizing me, that he's saying to
And maybe
me,
he was.
yeah, and maybe he was. And so he's
Yeah.
saying, you know what? You're no good. You're not any good. And what I have observed over the years, not only for myself, but as I've done a lot of these interviews, from people who have experienced it and then have come out of it or now trying to help other people with that, is that it affects their lives in a negative way. Oftentimes, that trauma or those negative experiences or subconscious, whatever you want to call it, the triggers
Yeah.
will literally cause them to make choices to go in a certain direction. And they're realizing at some point in time that they really are not experiencing the life that they want to live, that they're not really fulfilling their purpose, so on and so forth. So for me, what's curious, and it brings some other things to my mind that I'm not going to get into right yet, but as you
Okay.
talk about those experiences with trauma, whatever it happens to be, and perceptions that we have as individuals that can be different, how on earth does that help someone to understand and become a positive aspect in their life and help them in their purpose? So is there an example that you can share of a
Sure.
specific trauma that you worked with someone, and how you were able to help them to move that from a negative to a positive situation?
Well, you've said a lot, so let's
I
just
know.
back up. No,
I
no,
do
no,
that.
that's good. It's good. And I'm interested in the place where you were smiling and said, I'm not going to get into that because I know there's something interesting there. A part of me wants to say, let's talk about whatever it is you didn't want to talk about. But let me just say, there's trauma and conditioning. And conditioning is like a drip, drip, day to day. So if you want to be a stewardess and your father says you can only be a secretary. Yeah, I want to, you want to be an airline pilot, and your father says you can only be a stewardess. Like there's this slow drip of conditioning, both within family and community and society, that dissuades you out of being who you really are. And some of that even is just tribal, like to survive, you got to fit in a certain way. And I think that is in more insidious and also very harmful. Just what you were talking about, if your
Right.
father said something. So I don't think there's a human being that's not affected by trauma and conditioning, either just because it doesn't matter what happened, it's how you felt about it. So if you felt criticized, let's say you were, I don't know, left in your crib for an extra 10 minutes and you thought you were going to die or something, like it's not necessarily about the judgment of bad things doing things, bad people doing things to people. So, but I think your question is, how is that a good thing? Is that if I were to summarize what you're asking, and like how can I give you an example? Um, First of all, 20,000 people, like, I mean, I could just pick out it. I could be generic, or I could even speak about myself. Here's an interesting one. I I got in a lot of trouble for I'm a Sagittarius. If you're astrologic familiar, I speak truth. And I was a very curious little boy, and I just triggered the crap out of my mother for sure. Like, just my general nature was irritating her because I was very exploratory, and like I quickly learned, and she was volatile, so I quickly learned, and she was abusive with my brother. So I was like, okay, I don't want to get abused. So I became kind of very shy and very quiet, and I didn't talk. And you can see I'm annoying how much or at least my kids tell me that. Um, but I didn't speak, and when I did, I was always reading around me what was the right and wrong thing to say. So my real truth was always sort of behind the lines, and in a way, my life purpose is very much to communicate a truth to people. My business partner, Sarah, says I live on Molehill Mountain. If I'm working with somebody and they say something and I see something interesting and something they're just passing over, I'll stop and like a dog with a bone, I'll just stay with the detail that because my attention and my ability now is the places that I was so uncomfortable because I didn't want to trigger someone else's upset is exactly what I'm comfortable with. And it's a gift I have is just to be able to slow down, which most people don't do, and to be uncomfortable and be with things, whether they're popular or not. And I just wrote this in a newsletter. My mom passed in 2010. We healed up. We had a very good relationship at the end. And um, but whenever I was in those trauma patterns, I was super forgetful, always losing stuff. And anyway, we were on our way to the funeral. I in mad dash wrote my little eulogy and left it in the limo, and when I got up in front of people to give the eulogy about my mom, I had to do the very thing that I got in trouble for, which was improvise in the moment and speak truthfully from my heart. Which and so I just got up and I had this revelation. I just told the people that were there that this was the difficulty. This was the thing between my mother and I, and that in a way she trained me for the life that I was meant to live, which was to help people see very uncomfortable truths and be able to be be open and say things regardless of its popularity. And I think that would be one example. But if I'll just say one other thing, just a garden variety thing is, um, I mean, you're a doctor, right?
I was a dentist for years,
So
yes.
you're a dentist. Okay. Um, well, it just, I'm thinking about how people enter into service industries to help other people and then get kind of pulled into different kinds of bureaucracy and bullshit uh and you and the thing is you think you're trying to help society, and then you find out that like this society wants you to do it a certain way, and your ability to pull away from it often is in a way to reclaim the very sort of uh what's the word I'm looking for, like there's a way in which our parents are our first institution and we try to please them, and like when you step away from that you realize that you were sorry, I have a better example, forgive me for rambling. Your life is like a movie. If there was no conflict and no adversity to get over, then we wouldn't watch it. So the things that happen at the beginning of your life give you the motivation, the fuel to like to have thing at the end credits where he's driving down the highway and he feels like he's finally figured out and he's free or whatever. I think that's what we're all doing. We're all overcoming the adversity of the things that we felt harmed by when we were young. But we have to be willing to experience them in order to release them. That's what I do with breath work.
Well, and it's fascinating. And as I said, something that came to my mind as I watch different social media, and I watch because I'm on it, and I
Uh-oh.
kind of get a kick of doing that. I shouldn't do
Yeah.
that, but I do. Uh, and it's more of an observation that I find is there's so much victimhood, whether it's about the country, whether it's about politics, whether it's about religion, whatever it is, there's so much
Yeah.
victimhood that comes across. And oftentimes, I hear people will say, why would God let this happen to me? And when you were talking about the fact that all of our experiences, if we somehow are able to move them into a different level of awareness, they
Yeah.
become the very strength that helps us to fulfill life purposes.
You absolutely got it right. I don't think there's such a, I think the idea of a victim is a lie. It doesn't exist. You create your own reality, and whether you know it or not, you certainly create it by just your attitude and reaction to anything in any situation. But if you have something to fulfill this life and you've come to do it, every experience of your life is trying to help you to do that, even the terrible ones that you don't like. And when you come to discover this, not just as an idea, but an actual truth inside you, you realize you're never the victim is the idea that you have no choice or agency. Now, as a child, of course, you're still unconscious. So your soul chooses the life that you're having, but you can't really control those things that happen to you. But as an adult, because there's no children probably listening to your podcast, but as an adult, everything that you have a choice in. And so to say that you're a victim of something is taking away your responsibility, but your agency to do something about the life that you have. And you can see that people often with the worst things have done them. Nelson Mandela was in prison for almost 30 years. Like, you know, people who complain, which I think is sort of what you're talking about, it's a
Yes.
complaint. You're saying, I got a complaint about life. If you do that, you're inherently being in the negative. You're not saying, this is what I want to create. This is where I want to go. Your life purpose is somewhere you want to go. And trauma makes you have the attitude that somehow you're not in control of it when you are.
Well, and oftentimes, and I'm fascinated by, you know, personalities. I'm fascinated by emotional levels of awareness and so forth. And I
Yeah.
watch this and I see people that are stuck in anger. They're just stuck there and they don't seem to be able to get out. Here's my question for
I've
you.
never been stuck in anger. Have you?
No,
I
no,
mean,
no, no,
I've
no.
never had a problem with that.
You should watch me trying to communicate with the Thai people here and getting frustrated because I don't speak Thai
Yeah.
and they don't speak English. But anyway,
If you want to know how someone is with anger, just watch them when they're driving.
yes. So here's the question. People go through their lives, and as you say, I love the movie aspect of this. People have got a life movie, and so often that movie in their life, they never really are aware, or they have not become aware that, you know what, I can change this. I do not have to suffer. I do not have to experience this negativity. What have you found are some of the key elements to help someone to be able to
Mm,
have some signposts that they
yeah.
can look at as they're listening to this and go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm experiencing that, and
Mm,
yes, I'm experiencing this,
mm,
and
mm.
and all of a sudden, an awareness comes about within their mind to where they realize that, you know what? I need to make a change, number one, and number two, I can make a change.
Well, if people are listening to the podcast, this is one step, which is just knowledge and information. But the challenge of knowledge and information on its own is that we're already traumatized from having been trained to make our minds, our linear minds, the most powerful aspect of life. And then you get rewarded for how much stuff you can learn and regurgitate. And in a way, it keeps people in the same matrix that they don't even, it keeps you unconscious. You use the word awareness, so I think it's really important to identify what are we looking for. I think to me, I say there's, and I write this in my book, there's four levels of the mind, because the body mind is a mind too. So we have different processes, thinking processes, if you will. But the soul, the higher self, the thing that's come to live this life, you have to get connected to it. That has to be step one, because if you're trying to live your life solely from the linear mind, information is not going to transform you except at the very, very beginning. You have to have visceral, universe is creative. Like that's, you have to have experiences in life that give you that like momentary realization. So I say it's like a three-legged stool. One, you have to have a practice of some kind. And you can't be compulsion. Shouldn't do a practice that you hate. If you don't like meditating, don't meditate because, it's not that
Oh,
fun.
yeah.
I mean, sitting doing nothing and watching your breath is not for the faint of heart in a way, because people are, so, but having a practice, if you want to get better at tennis, you're going to have to practice. But if you won the high school tennis tournament, but you want to play in Wimbledon, you're going to need a teacher. So two is have a guide, have somebody who's knows more than you about the subject that you're studying. So if I have a teacher who calls it the spiritual gym, like what are you going to do in the spiritual gym? So you pick the thing that will help you to gain better awareness. And then you find somebody to help you see about yourself what you can't see. Like, I mean, this is all I've been doing my adult life with others, but also I have teachers and have had teachers. So you're, and then practice every day, whatever it is, because you can't, it's one thing to have a realization that's not going to just change your life in that moment. Might change the direction of your life, but you have to live it. The thing that I had said earlier about movement, and why I use movement is that trauma is like a static state. It's your energy in a certain state, but but we're not static. We're moving through life. So you have all these unconscious habit patterns when you go to fulfill your life. So if you have a practice, you also have to do the practice out in your life. And I use movement for that with people because I love internal, it's based on Taoism, 10 animals. So these practices are to teach you how to be authentic in your life. So I'm saying three things: have a practice, have a teacher, and go out into the marketplace and practice. Like go out into life and try to be that practice in your life.
Well,
My
and
favorite topic. That's why I can.
yeah, and I think you hit it on the head.
Yeah.
We've got to decide that we're actually going to do something about it, and
I
that's
assume
where
if people
that
are watching your podcast that they
yeah.
are those people, right?
Yeah, so here's my question with what you're doing, okay? And I find it fascinating. Do people get to a point where you've worked with them and, I don't know how many sessions you would need to work with someone, but do they get to the point where they're able to lie down and do that effigy breath work
Hmm.
on their own without your guidance, or do they constantly need to be with you?
Well, there's complexity. What you said. There's three things. First of all, um, with the breath work itself, yes, it's rigorous and challenging to breathe full for an hour without stopping because of the nature of trauma, and that's why you do it. Eventually, you can. Some people can do it very at the very beginning, and then as they get going, it gets harder. but there is a certain amount of it and a certain amount of the breath work you can do, and then you're mostly cleared of like big traumas, and then it does sort of become more like a meditation. I If somebody's becoming a facilitator of the breath work, like I'm training them in a program, it's a 9 month program. They At some point around 6 months in, one of their pieces of homework was to go lay down and breathe on their own by
Okay.
themselves. So yes to that. I don't. I've had people I've worked with, like being a guy, being people's guides. Like I've had relationships over many years, and sometimes someone just meets me once, but working with me privately isn't so much what I'm doing now. I'm more in group work with little bits of private work. So, uh, uh, but I love to work with people. But the individual work, I think part of me, breathwork's still not in the mainstream. And I had a vision 30 years ago. I saw myself at Madison Square Gardens breathing 10,000 people. And I'm not going to, I would like to see breathwork become as mainstream as yoga did. And if I keep just one to one to one to one, not so much. So I don't do as much private work as I used to.
Okay.
So I
I-
have programs all the time going on.
Is it a daily practice or is it something you do each week or how does
You
that
can
work?
do you can do a lot of it if you're willing to be in the sea change of what happens, because it will accelerate your karma. It'll accelerate your lessons in your life. So if your life is really, let's say you're in a long-term marriage with lots of problems and all, like it could collapse your life, because it's a mysterious practice how it affects your magnetism, your outer life. Like you might breathe, and then somebody doesn't talk to you in 20 years, calls you out of the blue. It's got a bit of that quality to it, but it really brings up a lot, and you have to integrate those changes. So you only want to do as much as you can handle. So sometimes if people are in a bad way and a lot of urgent stuff, doing a lot of it is great because they're just going to make it better. But if you're slow going in a huge bureaucracy of your life that you're at the center of, maybe once a week or once a month. Yeah. I
Okay.
myself breathe some every day. I don't need to breathe for an hour. I just like it. So I do some myself. I haven't not breathed in probably 7 years.
Wow.
Even if
S-
I get up at 3 in the morning, go to the airport, I breathe because it just keeps my pipes clean.
That's great. And, as we're coming to a close here, how
Yeah.
do people find you? Because
Oh,
obviously, people that are listening are going to want to at least get to your website and
yeah.
maybe even see what you offer.
Yeah, and I have a partner. Her name's Sarah Sharmoli. She sort of administrates, but she's also a teacher. But if you Effigy Breath, EFFIJI, effigybreath.com is my website. If you just click the contact link, if you want to speak to me directly, send me a message. I'm totally happy to hear from other humans. Um, and I have a newsletter. It goes out almost every day. If you don't want to hear from me that much, don't subscribe or you'll be annoyed. Um, I have my book. There is like we have pop-up virtual breaths now. It's not on a schedule. Next year I'm doing a year-long personal development program and facilitator training. So there's like something for every level. Yeah.
Okay. And as we close, what would be the message that you'd like to share with the audience that they can remember?
Every human being has a unique energetic configuration that is your life purpose. It's who you're meant to become. And all the things that we are doing in our life, even the mistakes we're making in the process, are some part of us that's trying to fulfill that. Um, don't give up on yourself, because that potential is there, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Uh, that acorn is trying to become an oak tree at all times.
Oh, wonderful. Elijah, this has been fascinating. I
Thank you.
appreciate so much. And I'm going to get your book. Is it on Audible or is it strictly?
It is on Audible, yeah, and
Okay,
Spotify and Amazon and my website. So
perfect, perfect.
yeah,
Hey, well, thanks so much. I
yeah, I
really,
really enjoyed talking with you.
oh,
Yeah,
I enjoyed this. This was great. And we could go on for hours, I think, but
I have
obviously,
that feeling.
yes.
Are you a Sagittarius?
No,
Pisces?
I'm an Aries. So
An
there,
Aries. Okay, it's the fire. That's how I feel. Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
there you go.
good.
Anyway, thanks so much. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope
Yeah.
you enjoyed this and look forward to having you join us again soon. This is Dr. Doug saying namaste.